Yeah, so it was in November 2021 when Peng Shuai put a social media post up on the Chinese site Weibo, and she made pretty explosive allegations there, giving very detailed aspects about a long-term affair with the former Vice Premier Zhang Gali. It was an on and off again relationship. It was reported in the West that she had accused him of sexual assault, claims that she herself wrote to the WTA, the tennis body that runs women's tennis, saying that that is not what she claimed. And there were doubts about whether that was actually an email from her. And there was all sorts of saga and turmoil that built around this. The WTA decided it would stop all tennis tournaments that were taking place inside China. But of course, the other side to that, and the way that it was reported in China at the time, was that the borders were shut to China anyway and nobody could come in. So there was no way those tournaments were going ahead. But this was also taking place against a backdrop of the Winter Olympic Games that were fast approaching in a few weeks' time. And there was a diplomatic boycott, again, from Western nations of those Winter Olympics. So Peng Shuai saga happened right in the middle of all of this other stuff that was swirling around US and China politics.
And what impact has it had on the Women's Tennis Association since then and the Chinese government?
Yeah, well, the Chinese government hasn't said too much. We know that the borders in China were effectively shut for 3 years, and so it wasn't possible to have those tournaments anyway. And a number of other sports that were also not able to be held during the COVID impacted era are now coming back. And so the statement overnight from the chair and the chief executive of the WTA, Steve Simon, has been seen by some as a bit of a back down. He says he understands why they see it that way. And you would have to ask that, you know, in the initial stages when he said that the WTA was going to boycott tournaments in China, and this was all because of, determining moral and ethical standards of right and wrong. He was demanding a clear and transparent investigation at the time and proof that Peng Shuai was okay, because there were reports that she had disappeared, although we did see her come out and give some staged interviews during the Winter Olympic Games. But, this does appear to be a back down, and a back down that one would have to say has been inspired very much by money and the need to continue to have big time tournaments and, very lucratively sponsored by the Chinese government and Chinese companies.
So it's no surprise at all then that the WTA has made this decision to resume tournaments in China right now?
Well, I think the surprise was probably not that they backed down. That was going to happen at some point. But the surprise is that how easily governing bodies can make these sorts of decisions, get praised at the time for, upholding great standards of ethical value, and then suddenly apparently backtrack. We've seen no change in the Peng Shuai situation. People still don't know whether she is being detained or not. And yet here we are with a complete backtrack and yet no sort of sense or description as to why and what has led to this. So one can only assume that it's money.
And as you say, we don't know where Peng Shuai is at the moment. What do we know about her whereabouts and what's happened to her?
Well, the WTA is saying at the moment that they have received some guarantees from people that know her and people that they know that she is living safely with her family in Beijing. But there were reports of that already way back in 2021 when they decided to boycott events or suspend events in China. So in that regard, very little of very specific detail has changed in any way. But we know that with the reallocation or the resumption of being able to play in China, we're talking about upwards of $30 million worth of events, including the very lucrative WTA final series, which will be held in Shenzhen, and that on its own is worth $20 million in prize money. So in a business sense, it's sensible to go back to China. But if we're talking about a WTA and a professional sport that was taking all sorts of accolades for upholding strong values, then you have to ask, where have those values disappeared to?
Very conflicting there. Tracey Holmes, thanks so much for explaining that to us.
Thanks very much, Yvonne.